Salams, you're watching NewsClick. We're coming to you today from our studios in New Delhi, but we are mapping fault lines around the world. We're focused today on Trump's ongoing tariff wars or trade wars that is rapidly expanding to cover most parts of the planet as we know it today. The most full frontal attack of late, apart from China, of course, has come against some of the United States' closest allies, neighbors as well, Mexico, as well as Canada to the north. We'll examine what is driving Trump's response and what led to eventually the governments of both Canada and Mexico backing down a little bit on that front, giving them a 30-day break from the imposition of those tariffs on bilateral trade. Joining us to, of course, talk about all of these things and connect the dots between various things that are going on around the world that will connect up is Editor-in-Chief Prabir Purkayasa. Good to see you as usual. We'll start with the allies aspect because I think a consistent theme the past few weeks we've been talking about is, being a friend of the United States and what kind of impact that has rather than those who are in opposition anyway. So we'll get to China, but first, how are you seeing this play out given Claudia Sheinbaum as well as Justin Trudeau kind of buying time for their economies to deal with the impending impact of these tariffs?
Well, I think the interesting part of it is that both these have backed off on the base demand which is being made. Of course, the base demand that is being made is one, too many people coming into the United States from Mexico. As we know, there has been this continuous issue of sending back people to Mexico, that Latin American entry into the United States takes place through Mexico and so on. Basically the question of immigration. Canada has been in the, for some reason, I'm not clear what, has been also under the nozzle, the gun, for supposedly fentanyl and other issues. Now, fentanyl being both an issue with Mexico and Canada, the argument would be that it's ultimately the US drug industry, the pharmaceutical industry that drove that fentanyl epidemic in the United States. Others only did what the US companies wanted. They wanted to import, they did. So therefore,
also, there's no real balance. For example, I think one report indicating that the US, 150 times as much fentanyl flows from the US to Canada as does from Canada to the US. So it's really a reverse issue in many ways.
Yeah, so it appeared that Trump doesn't really care what is the pretext. If we go to what he starts by saying, that targets were Canada, Mexico and China. Yes, China has a large trade in which it exports a variety of goods to the United States. And it's an economy which is seeking at least to be a long-term competitor to the United States. It is the world's biggest trade partner for most countries. More so today than, say, 20 years back, when most of the countries, the biggest trade partner was the United States. So that is really the target. But it's interesting the way Trump has moved, that his allies have been more under the gun than his long-term competitor, which is really China. And in that race of who he is going to hit, the next ones are going to be the European Union, whom also he has threatened with tariffs, but it's in the future. So this is how the scenario seems to be playing out. I don't think what is the issue is what matters to Trump. He is basically saying very clearly that we believe that now, via trade, we cannot extract our surplus. So what we need to do is extract surplus from you directly with threats. And I think that is really what is happening. Change your policies, change your economic policies. Let us get our tribute directly from you in various forms. If we don't, then we will lower the hammer on you because we are your biggest market. We can damage you much more than you can damage us. This seems to be the principle on which Trump is operating.
And we'll connect that later on in this conversation, Prabir, to the attempt to shut down USAID and how that will impact some of the soft power that the United States has, I suppose, in a bipartisan manner over several decades, tried to accrue for itself around the world. But like we said, pauses for 30 days on those tariffs, Prabir. This is, of course, the
So
area that we are looking at.
this is the interesting part. Canada and Mexico seem to be the immediate targets.
Yeah.
They are the immediate neighbors.
Yeah.
What is the long-term target? Of course, next target is the Americas as a whole. Because this, under the Monroe Doctrine,
Yeah.
was supposed to be their turf.
Part of the. Yeah.
We've already seen Denmark coming under the scanner because of Greenland,
It connects
which
up-
is
up there.
here,
Yeah.
up here.
Yeah.
So already his focus, the narrow focus, is geographical proximity and lowering the boom on them first. And that's the interesting point, as you said. 30 days time for what? So they have promised we'll stop fentanyl coming in, but as you said, more fentanyl was flowing into Canada than
Yeah.
flowing from Canada.
Yeah.
So it doesn't make sense,
Yeah.
therefore, to make that kind of concessions, which there is none to make.
And impossible promises also, Prabir, to fulfill, because I mean we've seen the trafficking of drugs around the world for a long time now. U.S. military has clearly not succeeded in shutting that down.
Well, because the drug trade is closely aligned in a lot of places with
With the militaries
military's
themselves.
interest itself.
Yeah.
You know, the other part of it when you were talking about this, that the real concession that Mexico has made is 10,000 troops on the borders, which means we will stop the migrant flow. So that is really perhaps
Yeah.
the Trump target.
target.
The real target is
Yeah.
really that,
Yeah.
because he has to deliver really the questions that he's already raised on immigration. And he has to deport people, he has to buy the concurrence of at least Mexico on that. And that is, I think, the direction on which these threats, tariff wars are being fought. But behind the scenes,
Yeah.
some of the tariff is tribute, that's what he's going to claim, but also the issue of immigration. And this 10,000 on the border
Yeah.
is more for immigration than perhaps for fentanyl.
Fentanyl. And interesting you mentioned tribute, Prabir, because Canada, in a way, paying that tribute quite directly by pledging over $1 billion to border controls, whether it's through unmanned or manned surveillance, including putting more people. And I'm assuming maybe this is an incorrect assumption, but it's not to stop the flow of white Canadians to the United States.
Also, the point is about the free trade agreement.
Yeah.
It does appear the free trade agreement is also what
jeopardy.
Trump wants to hit at, because that helps in some sense for Canada and Mexico to export goods to United States. So we'll have to see how this plays out.
Yeah.
But it is a reworking of the equation between the United States, the dominant economic power, and Canada and Mexico to a more vassal state position. And I think that is what the game is. And having done that, it will probably extend to South America and to European Union as well. Because when you want to extract tribute, your vassals are more susceptible than those who are relatively independent.
Yeah.
So while China is its target, but the vassals are the tribute, are the countries which can pay tribute. What is its relationship with Asia going to be? What's the relationship with Africa going to be? It's going to come, I think, third in this dance.
Yeah.
Because the next target, I think, will likely to be European Union.
Yeah. Also, just and this may or may not be relevant, Prabir, but this is an administration that is talking very loudly and going ahead and making moves towards dismantling as much of the machinery of the US government as it possibly can.
Before we go into that, I think we should also have a quick look at
this.
Panama Canal issue, because the threat of Panama Canal being seized meant that Panama has made concessions to the United States, and there were certain projects they were doing in China which they have now agreed they will probably shut down. So threats of the United States to do various things are working. Will it make a difference to Greenland? We don't know. We'll have to see what happens. But Denmark might be under the scanner as a part of European Union also.
Sort of conflict in this idea that on the one hand they're trying to, reduce government in all of these, but want more government spending from their neighbors on things like border control and security and stuff like that.
Yeah, border control is essentially
not part of
protection of America.
Security.
So that's okay. Security, military are different.
Yeah.
But also before, again, we go to those issues, and what you're raising are very important. The issue is the difference with China. China was hit with a lower tariff, 10%. But of course, China's trade is huge. With the United States, it's huge.
Yeah.
So 10% is probably bigger in volume than what comes from Mexico and Canada.
Yeah.
So the amount was large. But China also has more, or shall we say, has relatively more independence from the American economy because its biggest consumers are Chinese.
Yeah.
So internal driver of the economy is big. It doesn't only survive on external trade. Therefore, China seems to have asserted that if you hit us with tariffs, we'll hit you with tariffs as well. Now, what happens on that, we don't know. This is something to be seen. But obviously, China has not backed off as the other two have. So I think that clearly indicates that there is a longer term trade war that's going to come with the United States, between the United States and China.
Yeah.
And the trajectory of that we'll have to see. As you know, with recently the AI development that has happened, it's very clear China is not dependent on technology from the United States. From the United States.
Yeah.
So I think that changes the equation quite a bit.
Quite dramatically. I think another part of this whole equation that maybe you can share some insight on is Donald Trump has also opened a domestic front. Of course, some of these moves appeal to his core voter base, but these are attacks as much on the American working class, even the American middle class to a large extent, and definitely the American poor. So, what is likely to be the short-term impact? Like, even if it's pushed by a month, for example, in that belt up top bordering Canada, I would assume it would hit jobs, it would hit the prices of essential commodities, the price of fuel, for example, food, produce. So, what's the...
For at least next 30 days, it probably will be business as usual. Next 30 days. Long term, what are the linkages, as you put? Canada supplies a whole bunch of goods to the United States, including oil and gas. It's one of the largest suppliers, external suppliers of energy to the United States. Mexico supplies labor to when the harvesting season comes in California, Texas. This is the labor that goes across, and they're not immigrants; they're seasonal labor. So all of that, how does it handle? Can it actually handle its internal economy without the surplus labor coming across from Mexico? These are questions. But the point is, this may not be stopped. What has to be done is at least shall we say, the optics of it. The Trump has come down hard on various issues. Immigration, we have deported, say, 1 million people. Okay. Now, even if you have quote unquote guest workers for summer, winter, whatever you need them, at least you have sent 1 million back. So that is something that the constituency at home can take away. Then this whole attack on various social issues, which is a much more hard, right-wing, white supremacist position, that no concession to basically students from black or other communities. Now, all of those things are going to be also something which is their constituency will like. So all those things are there. But at the same time, can the internal economy keep on ticking when it is only based on more tributes, but really not on the growth of productive forces within the United States? And if the United States had an edge, it was in technology, science, and so on. And that, as we have now seen, is slowly
definitely
weakening.
under threat.
Definitely under threat. But also question, I think, is the soft power of the United States. And there we have also things that
also
you can
an
see.
attack. On what yeah, like we were saying, what the United States has spent billions or trillions of dollars over several decades trying to build in programs around the world, working on all kinds of things from industrial inputs to education to public health. Elon Musk, of course, has attacked USAID, a $40 billion organization, a massive budget, most of which goes to some projects in the global south. How does this fit into the overall picture, Prabir? And in that context, could you sum it up for us by drawing the connect with Africa and what's likely to happen there, which will come in the future? Of course, some of those developments underway, and West Asia, where phase 1 of the ceasefire will end around the same time that this tariff break comes to an end. So some perhaps shifts there as well.
I think tariff break will end up in the negotiations, and therefore I don't think that there will be actually a break in any sense, but essentially it will mean greater tribute, and that will be negotiated now with with the threat of this kind of tariff that Trump has talked about. So 25% threat will mean withdrawal at some point, but some increase and therefore some extra tribute. What is interesting is the dismantling of USAID and National Endowment for Democracy. Now, globally, these institutions have played the softer face of imperialism, if you will, of the United States, while the harder face of imperialism has been the US Army, Navy, Air Force, and of course the Central Intelligence Agency. So those have been really the two sides of the US policies. And USAID is of course the much softer part of this, because it is given for a whole bunch of things. It gives money. And that money is important, for instance, Africa, to keep the US influence going over there. And of course, it has, as people have said, its downside, because it makes them dependent. And if you are a dependent state, then of course you are more prone to pressure the pressures of the United States by opening your economy. And that's something that Africa has seen. It might be the richest continent in terms of mineral wealth, but the poorest in terms of what the people get. So USAID therefore gives that packaging of US imperialism, that it is not a colonial state, which it actually is, but it is actually trying to help Africa. So this veneer, this mask of being nice, we are nice guys, gets ripped off if you have an Elon Musk, which makes clear that I'm going to shut it down, that we are going to shut everything down. Therefore, what you will have left is only the stern face of imperialism. And I said, we are really going to an open tributary state, which United States wants to be. And therefore, their argument is, we don't need any soft talk, we don't need any other instrument except coercive instruments. And that is the real face of US imperialism today, that it is no longer the soft face that it showed. That's going to go.
The facade of promoting democracy and liberal values and all of, or maybe it's not a facade, that is the point. But now they are clearly going out and saying a unipolar world is the only way in which rules work.
That is one and only our rules.
Our rules, of course,
see, the facade,
they are the
I will say the facade of democracy, because they have promoted, the United States has been the one which has promoted coups all across the world. So there should be no illusion that what they do. And when the coup is done, then of course the USA, the National Endowment of Democracy, do come and give sops, do try and soften down the hard edge of US imperialism. But I think what you now see is clearly the hard face of US imperialism, because it believes soft face and the soft phase are both over. So what you need is really show what you are, which is the big stick. You either give tribute or we'll destroy you. And that seems to be the principle on which it works. Yes, it means huge changes, particularly in Africa. And that is where the those next battles are going to be fought, and of course also oil in West Asia, mineral resources from Central Asia. So all these are going to come into battles, and of course what happens to Southeast Asia and South Asia.
Yeah.
But I think every country in the world has to re-evaluate how it is going to deal with the United States in a phase where the naked power of imperial forces
unleashed in that
are
sense.
being openly
Yeah.
unleashed,
Yeah.
not only on people who are not subservient to them, but also their friends and allies.
And their own, I mean, internally as well, as we, have seen from conversations, a lot of partisan attacks and things that, for example, were agreed on by whether you have a Republican U.S. Government or a Democrat. The idea that they were the leaders of the free world seemed to be in common, which no longer is the case now.
Oh, I think that is true,
Yeah.
that there is a shared international view of the world,
Its place.
international politics, which both the Democrats and Republicans shared, not fully but partially.
Partially, yeah.
I think that is now changed into this hard realpolitik, and we have the stake, we'll determine the rules, both of politics, international politics, as well as international economics. I think that is something which is emerging clearly in what we see now.
Yeah, yeah. Some major developments also in the Congo, Prabir, which we'll talk about next time we have a chat on mapping fault lines. But thank you very much for your time today. We'll leave it there, and thank you very much for watching NewsClick as usual. If you haven't already, please do subscribe to our YouTube channel. Share this video with those who you think might be interested. Comment on the work we do. Yeah, and of course, stay tuned. We'll see you next time.